Good evening, good morning, depending on where you are, and welcome to Rebellious Research Seminar Series. It's an absolutely pleasure to have a really wonderful guest with us today, Pavel Prokopic, who's going to be talking to us about creative limitation as a radical mode of film conception and production. I'm going to stop sharing my screen if I can, and yeah, the next hour is yours, Pavel.
Okay, thanks a lot, Agata. Let me share my screen in turn. Actually, let me do it again with the sound. I forgot to tick that. All right, can everybody see my my screen?
Yeah, absolutely.
Excellent. Just give me one more second. I'll try to minimize this window here a little bit. All right, so thanks everybody for coming, and let me get into the presentation on creative limitations. First of all, I'll try to get the filler words out of the way. Hopefully, they won't be they're already coming, so you'll hear more of these throughout the presentation. But I'm hoping if I can get as many out as possible on this slide, I will keep good. So first of all, I just want to establish what I mean by creative limitation. Although it is a fairly self-explanatory term, creative limitation is a kind of voluntary or self-imposed creative challenge or practical obstacle. It can be often self-imposed, but it's often driven by true necessity and essentially limits the choices or options that the filmmaker has. The universal creative principle applies here, that less is more, and that creative limitation helps as well. And it is really a useful structuring principle for especially film work that gives it a certain aesthetic consistency. So I would like to start by going through some of my my evolution of my relationship with creative limitations and how I've gradually developed this into my work and my research. The first thing really is that when I kind of look back, and I wasn't quite aware of it explicitly, but sort of in hindsight, I realized that I was really influenced by Lars von Trier in my kind of early love of cinema, and I kind of realized in hindsight that Lars von Trier is all about creative limitations, and so many of his work is about creative limitations. And perhaps it all started. Lars von Trier made some very kind of polished films early on, but then he launched the Dogma 95 manifesto with Thomas Winterberg and other Danish filmmakers, and later on applied creative limitations to even a more radical extent in his work. And I think it's kind of useful to think about a little bit the Dogma 95 manifesto and what were the kind of the creative limitations that these filmmakers decided on in the spirit of sort of making cinema more pure, I suppose, and that's something that really links to some of the conceptual concerns that I will talk about later on. So the Dogma 95 filmmakers, for example, considered it important for there to be no sets built, nothing being artificial brought to the location. So there's again this kind of relationship to reality that's apparent here. That's something I will talk a lot more about. Also, they found it important for the camera work to be handheld, for there to be no additional lighting. So again, a lot of this is essentially about some kind of realism. And again, that's something that I considered much deeper through the conceptual framing of creative limitations that I'll talk about later on. Just to give one example, there were multiple films made under the Dogma 95 Manifesto. I think The King is Alive is perhaps the most interesting one of them for me. It's a really great realist narrative of this group of tourists being stranded in the desert in a tour bus, and then they are basically waiting for their death, and out of despair they decide to stage King Lear and for each other or everybody being involved. And again, just looking at the kind of brief clip from it just shows that sense of these self-imposed limitations being very much at play with the handheld camera work and natural, the kind of realism of the scenery. Lars von Trier then later developed another project, which I think is also very interesting and very much about creative limitations. It's called The Five Obstructions. That essentially is a documentary, experimental documentary that focuses on Lars von Trier giving a set of creative limitations to his kind of earlier generation Danish filmmaker Jørgen Leth, and who is tasked to remake his film from 1968, The Perfect Human, 5 different times. And the clip that is playing is just an excerpt from the first limitation, first obstruction, as von Trier calls them. And here, Leth is tasked to remake his film, The Perfect Human, but this time it needs to be in Cuba, and needs to have each shot only 12 frames long. So there are a few other obstructions that are perhaps less interesting, but again, we can see here in this short clip the effect of these especially the 12 frame the 12 frame length of shots seems to be an interesting self-imposed limitation here. If I could, yes. Another sort of, again, more radical approach that von Trier took with his film Dogville is this kind of a very grand limitation, which is that the whole feature fiction film takes place on a set, essentially, with all the with the environment essentially drawn on the floor as a floor plan, and with only basic furniture as a matter of interior of these sets. And it is again a fascinating experiment that again speaks to von Trier's commitment to creative limitations, really, and that sense of this kind of imposed obstacle, which again I think that is, as in all the films in Dogville, it again especially speaks to the kind of the aesthetic unity, really, that this kind of approach driven by the limitation achieves in the work. Sorry, I just don't know why I can't continue. Yes, that's right. So moving on from that kind of early influence, I have then very much been applying creative limitations in my work, and this is implicit in a sense that I wasn't always consciously thinking of these as creative limitations, but I have nevertheless prioritized methods through my practice as research, PhD, and later my practice in research more broadly, and always found it interesting to work from certain to respond creatively to actually to imposed limitations, production limitations. And I have later, when teaching, first at Queen's University and then at Salford, where I'm currently based for the 6th year, I have then sort of started applying creative limitations more and more in teaching, and found them to be excellent tool, especially for experimental film, but even teaching cinematography at Queen's University, and sort of creating the mechanism for students to be able to be driven by methods rather than necessarily their ideas imposed onto reality. I would also like to just here mention this publication that is actually, it's from 2021, and it is based on my work on the cinematography module at Queen's University. And although I kind of realized when building this slide that the title or the abstract doesn't mention creative limitations in any way, in fact, the article is about creative limitations in some way and provides the context for creative limitations. And here specifically on this module, the creative limitation, the co-creative creative limitation was for the students to use one of the sound pieces that are provided to them from my long-standing collaborator, Rob Želiga. And this is something that I again replicated to various extents at Salford as well, teaching on the experimental film module and also the established and innovative practices module on the MA in film production. And finally, I would like to mention the 24/7 competition that has been running as part of the INEF event. So just to say a little bit about INEF. So INEF is the International Network of Experimental Fiction Filmmaking, which are co-founded with Matthew Hawkins and Alex Lichtenfels. And we've been running it. It's going to be the 4th year, I believe, this year. We run a festival and a conference focused on the new field of experimental fiction filmmaking. And alongside the conference and the festival, we've been running this competition, 24/7 competition. It's called 24/7 competition because filmmakers are given 7 days to make a film based on a set of creative limitations. And so here again, I very much channeled the kind of approach I've taken in teaching undergraduate and graduate students and lifted some of these ideas about creative limitations into the competition, and so the idea is for filmmakers to include 3 different creative limitations, so that they have to choose one of each of these lists. So one of them has a creative technical limitation, another focuses on this notion of abstract theme, which is something that I've previously tested in teaching, I believe successfully, and then also include a piece of speech. This is something that links back to one of my earlier projects that I will talk about later, where I kind of included these kind of random pieces of speech as one of the limitations. But here really it's an interesting, inspiring factor for filmmakers to respond to. I just want to briefly, I don't know how sort of laggy this is. I'm just going to show this silently talking over it, but I would very much encourage anyone to view this film again on the inf.org website, where you will find some of the competition films. So this is the winner from the 2024. And in this film, the filmmakers chosen the lines, "You just play with me, I'm not a toy." And the abstract theme was "Behind the closed door," and the technical limitation was that all shots must be 1 second long. I'll just bring up the sound for a minute and just play it, just so that everyone can get a feel for this.
Are you on your phone? Well, I'm very hardworking.
Far better than listening to you.
I'm a hard worker. I'm a hard worker. I guess I never really. I'm a hard worker who is exceptionally hardworking. Sorry.
You
That's
fucking
not what I meant.
fucking loser.
Yes, some auto.
So these filmmakers sort of took the creative limitation of 1 second long shots to create this kind of back and forth between the kind of the subtext and the overt situation and what is going on in the mind of the characters in this interview scene. And it's what is clear from this film, which is it is a really excellent film, how much how much inspiration there is that can be rooted in creative limitations. How much can work really be entirely driven by the limitations rather than being rooted in an idea to start with. And ultimately that limitations and combining, especially combining a couple of limitations can really lead to a unique, fresh piece of work. Just briefly, sort of slight alteration for the most recent competition, which ran in 2025, which again had a different set of abstract themes. I've applied these themes from a broader set of themes that I've developed for teaching at Salford. So this is a different set of abstract themes, different pieces of speech or voiceover, and again another set of creative technical limitations. And again, just a brief mention of the winner of the 2025 run, which was Holly Royce, and she's chosen the line mistakes are low-hanging fruit. I don't like apples, which very much I would say informs the entire voiceover, sort of the poem underpinning the piece, and it informs the content of it as well. Wonderful Disaster was the abstract theme, and the creative technical limitation was only use still frames, no shot longer than 3 seconds, which is interesting that it's a fairly vague limitation, which is interesting how filmmakers responded to this differently. And there is, again, as always, no right or wrong about creative limitations, as they are meant to inspire creativity rather than impose some kind of a frustrating rule. And it's, again, very apparent how this set of creative limitations directly informed and just really made the work happen. I'm going to bring up the sound briefly.
The apple of her eye, the pear of her heart, the words she utters pierce the fuzzy peach. And there I am rotting, with only myself to blame. The pit in my chest is a baby's empty wail, with the worry of loneliness forever. It waits to burst, fermenting. I bite the rock, it breaks my teeth. Pieces of enamel ricochet, teeth too fragile to bite the fruit. In my dreams I run her a bath, giggles, romance, early. I take a shower. In my dreams we stare at stars that I pluck from the night sky and gift to her. To me? I don't like apples. Did you know if there were an ocean large enough, Saturn would float on the wall?
Okay, so again, I wish that everyone is able to view this film and pay it proper attention. It's not on the website as yet, but we'll include it soon. But there are a lot more films from the 2024 competition on the inef.org website to view. But again, I hope that this example illustrates the kind of the creative power of creative limitations. And so what begins to sort of manifest for me through these many years of evolution with creative limitations in my teaching and my research are certain kind of categories, I suppose, of creative limitations. And this is a strange list, but I will hopefully be able to explain what I mean here. So first of all, as we already alluded to, any creative limitation can either be arbitrary or necessary, meaning that either it's arbitrarily imposed or it's something that is just simply it's a limitation that exists in the filmmaking process that can be responded. So instead of seeing it as an obstacle that prevents film from being made, it is something that could be approached creatively. So as an example, let's say that somebody wanted to make a film but only had a stills camera. So instead of saying I can't make a film because I don't have a film camera, they could possibly make a film with still images in it, or let's say that someone doesn't have access to some kind of a fancy imagined location. Actually, reimagining their film for the location limitations could provide an inspiration and actually could result in a fresher, more interesting film. The second idea here or notion is that creative limitations can either be structural or embodied, and this is something I will talk about a lot more in the seminar today. And it essentially it's not again question of right or wrong or sort of one or the other. It's not a binary choice, but maybe there's a certain spectrum between structural, embodied, and I'll come back to this, and I want to elaborate on this in a lot more detail. Now that the question of what if, I think it's just a useful way of framing creative limitations, and I often explain creative limitations to students in this way, and specifically. The what if question could really be useful in ways in which for ways in which creative limitations can evolve across a project and can afford a certain reorientation towards a project. So we can at any point of the development of a project, we can ask what if something changed, what if this was only one location, what if each shot was 1 second long. And it is also true that basically any creative limitation can be framed this way. So this is not necessarily a distinct category, but maybe a certain overarching one way of framing creative limitations. And then we have few of these that already came up in the INEF competition, and to an extent even in von Trier's work. We have, of course, some of the creative technical limitations, logistical, practical limitations, and then of course that the abstract theme, which is I think a category of creative limitations that are developed specifically through my teaching and then later applied to the 24/7 competition. And now, sort of focusing on some of the conceptual ideas around creative limitations, and I want to dedicate a portion of this seminar to that. So. I already mentioned the idea of prioritizing methods, and I think generally we can think of creative limitations as prioritization of methods, and in some sense, whenever methods are prioritized over narrative intentions, or the kind of process is prioritized over outcome, then we are always kind of in the creative limitations territory in a sense, especially if we are creating certain consistency of methods and in that way focusing on the sort of structure for the sake of it rather than a structure as in service of a narrative idea. So all of these things are kind of related, and I think the prioritization of methods is key, and there I would say that's again where creative limitations are inherently native to practices research through that insistence on methods over narrative intentions or ideas. The engagement of the unknown and chance plays a big role. We'll come back to this in a moment. There's a lot more to say about this. And I would say that perhaps it plays more role in the kind of the embodied approach rather than the structural approach, but I think that generally it is inherent to creative limitation that we don't necessarily know where we're going to end up, and so to some extent this invites always chance to some extent, but this could also be maximized within the specific choices of methods, and that relates to that whole idea of co-creation of meaning with reality, which again I will talk a lot more about, and that again that's inherent to this whole idea of approaching the world with methods without necessarily having a clear intention or certain kind of idea to realize and impose onto reality. And in that way, the meaning eventually is created through the work, even if it only arises in post-production, but it is co-created with reality in some sense. It's not entirely just thought into the world. There's this kind of back and forth relationship with reality, something again I will come back to as I speak. And yes, so this is a really useful way to frame that that notion of that's kind of structural versus embodied. I think that the distinction between non-human and human, which comes from Deleuze, I think is very useful framing of this. And just to clarify that this kind of term on non-human is used in that Deleuzian sense. It's not meant to suggest it's something kind of alien, sort of a not human, but rather Deleuze sort of designates the term human for all the kind of the subjective, the cognitive, the world of language, or the world of concepts and language and ideas. And I think some of these other terms could kind of could fit into that as well, which are kind of related to that structural approach to creative limitations. That kind of a pattern, grid, categories, sorting, deconstruction. So again, this is not a question of right or wrong. Rather, what I'm suggesting here is that there is maybe some kind of a spectrum that every creative limitation or any approach to practice through creative limitation would have the structural components and will have the kind of the more embodied components. Although I suppose creative limitations that only emerge in post-production would be much more in that structural field. And the non-human is really the dimension of the body and the way the body relates to the world outside of language and cognition. It's that very much a kind of a Merleau-Pontian phenomenological understanding of embodiment, where again throughout my research I kind of sort of starting to see a relationship between a lot of these concepts. So these are large concepts that we don't necessarily have time to unpack, but I very much see that kind of notion of intuition, again, aligned with this non-human bodily presence in the world. Chance very much is an aspect of that kind of a opposite of pure intention. So in the absence of clear intention, it is this kind of unintentional kind of serendipity, I suppose. Atmosphere, likewise, very much. There's a whole theoretical field of atmosphere that I've written about previously. I want to mention that later as well. But again, atmosphere is all about this kind of participation in the world and has very much these Merleau-Pontian resonances. The rhizome is a kind of Deleuzian concept, as well as affect. And again, it's that kind of a sense of this immediate connection between elements rather than some kind of a hierarchical or kind of a top-down structure. It's an organic structure that emerges through immediate connections between elements, and again, affect is connected to that as well. I'll talk about significance later as well, but just wanted to outline this kind of conceptual division between human and non-human, which I believe is useful here. So just digging a little bit deeper into this, I want to talk a little bit about the film's privileged relationship with reality, which is something that I have thought about a lot in my research and practice, and I believe it's inherent to creative limitations, but especially to that kind of embodied non-human type rather than the structural cognitive type. And I think that we could illustrate this with many different examples, but I believe that Stan Brakhage is a really useful example here, and especially visions in meditation. So I'm not talking here about the purely abstract Stan Brakhage, but rather the Stan Brakhage that relates to reality, that relates to this kind of the way reality is found and the way it can be transformed and become a new aesthetic world of the image through what is essentially the inherent attribute of film, which is the indexical quality of film, meaning that it creates this direct imprint of light in reality that kind of bypasses the mind of the filmmaker. So of course the camera could be pointed at reality in a very intentional way, and reality could be submitted to the will of the mind of the filmmaker, but ultimately that's not what nature of film is. Film has this direct, unmediated relationship with reality, and somebody like Brakhage clearly demonstrates the power of this kind of this significance of film, and that of course resonates with again some of the Merleau-Pontian ideas that I mentioned earlier, and as well as the aspect of chance. So few quotes that underpin sort of the sort of my attempt here to conceptualize some of these ideas around the embodied creative limitation and that relationship of camera with reality. So first of all, as I said, is the indexicality, which is very well described by Stephen Shapiro, who says that the automatism and non-selectivity of mechanical reproduction make it possible for cinema to break with traditional hierarchies of representation and enter directly into a realm of matter, life, and movement. Yeah, so that I think that quote captures very precisely what I'm trying to explain. And interestingly, I think all of these has different resonances, and this one is an interesting in Robert Bresson, who's primarily an art cinema filmmaker, French filmmaker, who wrote this fascinating little book, Notes on Cinematography, that has these short poetic statements that are almost as a kind of advice to self or kind of notes to self on filmmaking, and I find it very interesting how this notion of chance and unpredictable in reality as the guiding principle of practice, how that very much manifests in Bresson's ideas. So Bresson says, for example, what no human eye is capable of catching, no pencil, brush, pen of pinning down, your camera catches without knowing what it is and pins it down with a machine's scrupulous indifference. Yeah, so I think that this is a perfect way to express that mechanical, direct, indexical relationship of camera to the world. And likewise, Merleau-Ponty, of course, doesn't talk about camera, thinks about the body, but I very much think about the presence of the camera as being an extension of the body, and kind of resonates with that embodied presence in the world. The camera is an embodied presence in the world, of course, but also the filmmaker bringing the camera to the world in the spirit of Bresson or other filmmakers like him. Is much more about the body than the mind, really. And this is a great sort of poetic way for Merleau-Ponty to put it. One's own body is in the world just as the heart is in the organism. It continuously breathes life into the visible spectacle, animates it, and nourishes it from within, and forms a system with it. So again, that idea I think is really useful about the idea of this kind of a unity of the body and the world, and that kind of non-human presence within it. And finally, that sense of significance, I think that is very much the effect, and in fact, Barthes, when talking about this idea of third meaning, is very much analyzing the effect of in film rather than thinking in practitioner terms, but the notion of significance is very interesting as that kind of what is at stake in this film communication, this visual expressiveness of film that really transgresses language, and I think again this short quote from the third meaning I think captures this very precisely. So that this Barthes' third meaning, which is this kind of unique expressiveness of film, is theoretically locatable but not describable, and can be seen as the passage from language to significance and the founding act of the filmic itself. So again, that kind of resonates with that unique expressive power of film that I've been talking about. So in the final portion of my talk today, I would like to give a bit of background and context of 4 different projects of mine that I've arranged chronologically as they kind of came into being. And I would say that I haven't necessarily been thinking about sort of overtly framing my approach as a creative limitation, but at the same time, I would realize in hindsight that I'm so immersed in that very idea of creative limitation that it's something that I'm kind of unwittingly doing, even if I'm not rationalizing it. And so I just wanted to first bring up this overview of the projects, because I think that in preparing this talk, I kind of became aware of the slight differences between the approach here, and so that there is this apparent journey for me from framing chance to kind of reframing chance, and then being framed by chance, and then prioritizing space over frame, and likewise this kind of journey between from direct encounter with reality to indirect encounter with reality, and then to having the whole process of filmmaking emerging from reality, and finally shaping a narrative idea that emerges from the conditions in reality. So for me, this is a kind of a nice way of framing these 4 projects. So let me talk first about the first one, which is a film that emerged from my PhD practice as research that resulted in multiple short films called Affective Science. This one is called Affective Science 5, and I just want to say a little bit about the kind of the approach here and how it shaped the film. So the again, sort of being driven by methods, the idea here was to film in a busy public space, but at such a long focal length that the camera would be completely invisible to the passers-by, and likewise the film wouldn't capture any passers-by, but would only basically turn them into abstract foreground and background, again due to the extremely pronounced low depth of field in the image. And that just seemed like a fascinating concept for me, to essentially stage a fictional scene on the street. It's a very simple script, simple narrative. It's a back and forth dialogue between a fundraiser and this kind of awkward, creepy guy that's taking advantage of the situation to kind of to ensnare this fundraiser and play games with her. And it's so there's this kind of extreme focal length creative limitation, sort of filming in the busy scene. I would just let me maybe play this little bit with sound so that people can get a sense of how the film sounds.
Does it really need?
So what do you... Sorry, what's your name?
Mark.
Mark?
Mark.
Do you want me to tell you more about what we do?
Wouldn't it be better if I just signed up straight away? You know. But would you mind if I told you that the only reason I want to sign up is because I enjoy talking to you?
I'd rather you did it because of the charity.
What's wrong with being cute and charming? I bet you reap that fruit all the time.
I don't quite know what to say to that.
Where are the words when we need them the most?
Look, it's fine if you have other reasons to sign up.
So one of the really important aesthetic elements of this film that emerged in post-production as a kind of out of necessity, really, rather than self-imposed limitation, was the fact that as a result of filming in an extremely busy location, the sound was very noisy, and it was actually quite hard to edit the kind of shot reverse shot together because of the huge differences in the noise, the background noise. And so I made a decision to redub the entire film, the entire dialogue, which then presented the really interesting creative opportunity of being able to remove entirely the sound of the film, and create this kind of hypnotic feeling that was emphasized by the music composed by Jan Schickel, which again speaks to this strange kind of a hypnotic kind of a world that very much creates a kind of sense of internal, like these people are locked in some kind of an internal clash of minds within this extremely busy place, which kind of again very much mirrors the conditions of the filming, which is that all these people are passing by, thousands of people passed us by, no one had any idea that there is this scene being filmed right in the middle, and that kind of is interestingly mirrored in the aesthetic conditions of it. I just want to, for illustration, just want to show what was the original sound like.
If I told you that the only reason for me to sign up is because I enjoy talking to you.
I'd rather you signed up because of the charity.
What's wrong with being cute and charming? I bet you reap that fruit all the time.
Just to say one sort of additional thing, which is quite interesting, which was that kind of another element of chance or unpredictable thing emerging from the filming, is because I had this ambition with this angle to have this additional angle of the two shot, which was actually filmed inside the building we were in. And because we were only two-member crew, I was directing and recording sound, and my colleague was operating the long focal length camera on the street. This DSLR camera set up inside the building only could film for 30 minutes before it would stop recording. So I was busy running, apart from directing the film and like managing everything. I was every 30 minutes I had to run inside the building to restart the camera, only to realize that I didn't seem like it made sense to use it, especially because it was filming through this tinted glass. So it's got this weird tint to it. So the entire sort of the entire rushes have this additional angle that really doesn't appear in the film. But the reason I'm saying it is that I think that this kind of additional kind of forced limitation creates interesting creative conditions where the mind of the filmmaker can be sufficiently distracted to actually just somehow execute the work on an autopilot. And very much, again, it's a question of co-creation with the reality and inviting the flaws and also the serendipity that emerges from the process. And so in a way I feel blessed to have been distracted by running back and forth and trying to manage this third camera, because it really allowed us to simply flow with the reality in the moment. Okay, so this is the second project I wanted to talk about, which is called 400 Feet in Forgotten Time. And this is very different. So again, here we have this notion of reframing chance and indirect encounter with the reality. And here the creative limitation, the overarching creative limitation, was to simply purchase Super 8 film on eBay indiscriminately. So I've obtained about 60 reels of film. I didn't know most of the times what's on the film. My key motivation was to buy the cheapest reels I could, so I could maximize the quantity of film. And what I did then, I viewed all the material. In fact, I filmed it I projected on the screen and filmed it to create this kind of very lo-fi reference footage. And then I found interesting moments in it that I thought were kind of had interesting moments of expression, and then combined them into a sequence that I made sure that it's long enough to fill in one reel of film, because again the idea was to fill in a one reel, 400 feet reel of film. And then when I was happy with this proxy edit, I implement the edit on the physical film, and then had the whole film scanned. And what's interesting is that the material that arrived on eBay was generally could have been separated in two different categories. One was commercially released films, and other were home reels. And I initially tried to combine them, but I then realized that it was very strange, it was very jarring to cut between the commercially released and the home films. And so what I ended up doing instead, having the first kind of introductory part of the film, about 5 minutes, which only combines the commercially released film. You can see that on the screen presently, and then the rest of the film has only the home movies in it. And it's very interesting in that kind of a sense of, again, these I'll just change to this is an excerpt from the home movie reels. It was very interesting how again, this kind of indirect encounter with reality, that there is this material out there, but it very much it appears in reality for me, in a sense that I of course reached out in the real world to acquire these films on eBay, and it's fascinating to uncover and to be able to structure some of this material into a film, and again to play around with this expressiveness, the sense of significance, rather than trying to construct any kind of a predefined meaning. And yet again, this process allowed for co-creation of meaning with the reality, the fact that I acquired these films and not any others, and in that sense generating a pure encounter with reality. Okay, so the third project I want to talk about is a film called Becoming Barcelona. It was part of a broader practice that I call affective atmosphere. I published on this concept and some of the practice in few open access publications. I will mention one later on. And so I'm not going to necessarily talk about the approach of affective atmosphere, but these publications focus on that method of filming, which essentially relies on this continuous presence in this poetic, meditative, intense relationship to reality, and having both the performance and filmmaking decisions emerge from that. But as part of this process for this specific film, again, if framed as a creative limitation, the limitation was to travel to Barcelona for 36 hours and with two performers. So it was just me and two performers, and I was continuously filming on 4 different cameras, and we were continuously present in this affective atmosphere, meaning that we were not engaging with each other as ourselves, but we were constantly in this kind of in this heightened state of being. And the resulting film is very much is very much real as a sequence, because the whole process of flowing through reality and this kind of endless journey to for no particular purpose or no kind of predefined destination, this kind of round trip, essentially gave the film a structure that the film is a kind of a road movie in some way, and the film essentially is structured as that kind of the chronology of the trip itself. But what's interesting, that although there was no particular narrative intention other than the trip itself, that through the condensation and through the kind of radical selection of the material from the raw footage, that a sense of character emerges and a sense of kind of a borderline story, a sense that something is going on, that there is some kind of subtext to it emerges as well. But again, none of this was intended. This all again emerged in that fundamentally co-creative process with reality. I can play a sound a little bit here. Yes, the sound design and music were composed by Jack Foran. Just to make sure to mention Jack. I wanted to say one final thing on this process, that there is this kind of a continuous resonance. So whereas in the affective sign 5, the redubbing of the film was forced because the sound simply wasn't usable, I was playing with this kind of technique more intentionally in post-production of this film. As we were filming, each performer had had a hidden lapel microphone under their garments, and were continuously recording sound into their phone in their pocket, and then we kind of synced up the whole footage, but then decided to redub the whole film. And it kind of just want to show one scene where there's this kind of simple intention of well, the idea emerged simply. I should have mentioned one additional limitation really that took place here, that I had these 4 cameras. One of them was a Super 8 camera, only had 3 film cartridges, so I had about 9 minutes to film. And so each time I was kind of rolling the camera, there was a sense of this kind of a sense of pressure to something, for something to happen. And one moment when we were walking, I just kind of randomly decided the performer started engaging and talking, and I was kind of walking around them. Let me just show the scene quickly. It's the scene after this.
Will you still be the same in the morning?
I don't think so.
What will happen?
You always expect me to have all the answers, don't you? I'm sorry I don't.
Is there a difference?
It feels like there should be.
At least we're here now.
Yes, that is something.
And so just to make the point here that what was really useful about being able to redub the sound and drop it, so we then decided with Jack to actually introduce the sound of the camera that was originally there, to kind of reintroduce it, but as kind of purely aspect of production design, of sound design. Even the footsteps were kind of introduced there, but what it also then allowed to splice the scene. So for example, when it cuts to black, I then added an extra line and was able to connect to another sort of another clip, another shot from later on. And so it was a good opportunity to manipulate the shape of the scene further, whilst also maintaining that kind of the original unpredictable aesthetic of it. So just as I mentioned before, if anybody's interested to read more about affective atmosphere, there is this article in the Journal for Artistic Research, this online exposition that also includes the whole of Becoming Barcelona and another film that emerged from the technique as well. So finally, I want to talk a little bit about this project called Nested Cinema. This is my ongoing project, most recent one. This specifically was the short film Vera's Not Alone. Let me explain very briefly what the kind of the context of it is. So nested cinema is this concept of experiencing work that happens simultaneously in a physical space, but the space itself is part of the location. So essentially what you see here is this kind of this set that the actual member of audience enters, and then they watch the film on multiple screens and also at times in a VR headset. And essentially they are kind of immersed in the film, both in terms of sound, but also being in the actual physical location of the film. But what's really important for me to mention here is that the very idea, or what's kind of relevant to the talk today, is that the very idea for the film, the entire story, the very kind of existence of the film Vera's Not Alone, which is about this kind of post-apocalyptic story of this lone character that finds herself in this abandoned building and sort of creates a little sanctuary there for herself, which is this space that the character occupies in the film, and sort of ventures out into the broader building. This was entirely influenced by the location opportunity, which was this building, this Newton building at the University of Salford. Interestingly enough, what you see now, this has been now remade into these film sets for the BA Film Production course. But we were lucky enough in 2023 to find the building entirely abandoned, sort of from previous technical teaching, and we did a kind of, I was invited for a recce that was actually done for the purpose of rebuilding this into a teaching space, but I took advantage of this and sort of filmed the whole walkthrough, and then based on the walkthrough, I essentially developed the scene. So it's almost the limitation here was kind of what kind of a story can take place here, what could happen in this space, and so a lot of these spaces were directly used. In fact, this engine room, this is again the recce footage from the kind of walkthrough we did with staff, but this engine room plays a direct kind of prominent part in the story, and so essentially revisited these spaces and then tried to have that location indicate what kind of story can happen here. And again, whilst there is more of a sense of narrative than in the previous projects, it's very much the idea of co-creating again with reality in different ways, and you're specifically being inspired by the location opportunities. This is just a clip from the film itself. This is the horizontal screen. So just wanted to again show how the location was used in the final space, so that there's a power cut and the character leaves the den and then tries to turn on the power, and so here she kind of turns on the power and then finds herself in that space, which we saw at the Newton, which is very much that kind of plays the part of this strange post-apocalyptic environment. Yes, actually I realized this clip doesn't have sound, although I thought it would have, but it doesn't matter. Just quickly show you the scene in the boiler room. So now she kind of goes to the boiler room And there she suddenly notices that there is another person living alongside her in this vast space, and discovers this beddings of this mysterious other character. This is just another view of this, and again, this is not necessarily directly relevant to creative limitations, but just to again make it clear how nested cinema really was conceived as this kind of multi-layered simultaneity. So what you see here is in the left top corner is the VR view. So this is what the audience would see in this moment of the film in VR. And then we have the CRT screen, and then we have the horizontal and vertical screen. So as you remember, when we saw the character walk earlier, so that's the horizontal screen in the bottom portion, but then we get this simultaneous view on the vertical screen, and we also have this CRT view. And there's sound here, so I could show you a little bit with sound. Okay, so if again, there's I can't go into more detail on nested cinema, but if anybody's interested, there are a couple of publications out there. One is in the Leonardo Journal. You can find the full article on my website, pavelprokopic.com. So in case you are interested to learn more about nested cinema. So I'd like to conclude this somehow, just to bring everything home. And I think that the best way to do that is to make this a little bit less impromptu. So I'll kind of read a concluding statement for you. So creative limitation forces a relationship with the world, with the real. It renews the unity between the eye, the hand, the body, and the world, and the back and forth play of force and agency, the perpetual shaping and being shaped that set the rhythm and vibrancy of life. Creative limitation reminds us that doing always precedes thinking, that narrative originates in movement, not structure. Creative limitation is a powerful tool of filmmaking, as film forges a privileged relationship with reality. Film mirrors the movement of light that reflects off the contingent, vibrant matter of the real. Creative limitation thus represents a simple but powerful rewiring of the relationship between the camera, reality, and the filmmaker's mind. Here the mind learns from the camera's intimate relationship with the reality, rather than using the camera to impose received ideas upon reality. From the uncountable complexity of the real, film gives us a superior structure that transcends human language. Film is a non-human language of the new, and creative limitation is one of the most effective tools of the language of film. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Pavel. It's just so refreshing to hear you talk about, the kind of courage of thinking differently and not following just this idea that filmmaking is only just replicating on trying to redo what other people do in a way we respect. It's just like being really genuinely creative in a very kind of in the most profound way, really, because you're just really keeping your eyes open in terms of what you have, what kind of reality you have, what kind of limitations you have, and I get to that in a second, and what can be done with this. I thought it was absolutely fascinating, so I'm really deeply enjoyed it. I have plenty of questions. So I'm just going to use my privilege of a person who chairs this meeting. I just realized the light is very harsh here. I'm going to ask you a couple of the things, and I will open it for the public. But I just wanted to say that one of the things that really particularly enjoy when you were talking about the idea of co-creating with reality is how often we, and especially in our role of educators, how often we just forget about it, how what a beautiful feeling it is to just, keep your eyes open and just really, really properly look at what's around you. Just a short anecdote. I remember when I started doing photography, I was 13 years old, and my parents got me a dog, and I took my dad's camera, and I was just spent half a day walking with my dog. And I remember that at that time I knew nothing about photography. I just learned how to use the camera, but I was just really, really, I had all that freedom of just walking wherever, my legs took me, and just genuinely learning how to see things differently through the lens. And when we were talking about all these different things, I thought it was such a beautiful way of just really genuinely like co-creating with reality, with no plan, with no anything. Now, obviously, the challenge is twofold, really. The first thing is, like, as a creative practitioner and researcher, you've mentioned your PhD, obviously talked about projects which perhaps were linked to some kind of funding. What we always ask to do is to tell everyone exactly what we're going to do, how we're going to do it, and what the outcome will be, which in some situations is just the exact opposite of the way we're trying to approach things. So I was just wondering if you have any advice for perhaps young filmmakers who want to use similar way of approaching co-creating with reality. How would you advise them if they're, let's say, trying to defend a PhD, Viva, or apply for funding, to talk in a coherent and in a relevant way about what they're trying to do without sounding like, well, I'm just going to see what happens. So it's obviously a quite highly provocative question, but I was wondering if you have any advice, because this is quite fascinating, really.
Yeah, so that's a really interesting question. I think that in the industry or the real world context, this would be really difficult. I think that I think that the shorter answer is that you can't necessarily justify this as making any kind of commercial sense, right? So whenever you have a funder that would somehow be looking at maximizing audience numbers or some kind of a impact in the real world in terms of engaging audiences, I don't think that there is a case to be made for this. I think it doesn't lead to, I don't think that this approach can lead to a mainstream success at all. I think that this is a very much of a kind of a artistic practice. I think that what's really important in artistic practice, that it remains true to the kind of the process of working and that kind of what makes sense to the artist, really, and then the audience will come together of whoever it speaks to. So likewise, I don't think Stan Brakhage is a kind of a mainstream successful filmmaker, and we could speak of many filmmakers. Maybe Von Trier is a good example of somebody who managed to somehow combine both worlds and make mainstream films with whilst engaging in radical experimentation. But I think that's fairly rare. Now, in the research context, I think that is easier in a sense that I personally found myself in it. And the reason for it is that in the research context, you can woo people by focusing on the academic stuff, on the conceptual stuff. And what I found is actually that the conceptual stuff is inspiring for practice. It is something that could directly inform the methods and the working. And in fact, I don't think that I would have done any of the work I shared today with you. I wouldn't have done it if I didn't first engage with some kind of profound philosophical questions of film. And these questions in turn, these ideas emerged, me trying to understand what is film, what is the unique nature of film, what is the ontology of film. And in finding the answers, I was very inspired for practice, but also that gives confidence to funders that you are academically minded and you are interested in ideas. So I don't see that kind of a necessity in the academic context to tell everybody what's the story and what's the kind of how many people will come to see it, what's the genre and all of that. You don't have to do any of that as long as your academic grounding is credible, and then I think that's also inspiring. So that's a kind of win-win in that case.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think it's just genuinely so refreshing to see a kind of, a different conceptual way of thinking. It's really close to, to my heart. And I remember many projects I did where I just started from sometimes a very, very abstract idea, and I would have no way in terms of explaining what's going to happen, but I could really ground it within, certain ideas that I can link it to, or, kind of more abstract ways of thinking about creativity as well. So that's just really fascinating. So then another question I wanted to ask before I open it to public, and I'll have plenty of more if there's time as well. But one I really wanted to touch upon, because it was quite interesting. You obviously opened with talking about voluntary abstractions. I actually use it for teaching for my students. And I do abstract them. I make them do things and redo them on multiple ways. And I think it's such a fantastic thing. And it's just such an interesting exercise, because I don't know if your experience is similar, but in my case, they're terrified at first when I tell them, like when I show them the examples of what has been done in the original example and what I'm asking them to do. And then obviously they come up with amazing ways around it. And that again brings me to another very short anecdote about my film school. So I remember, like in the first year in film school back in Poland, I was led to this kind of really boring corridor, which looked quite horrible. And we said, well, you have 3 hours. This is your camera. Take nice photos. And there was literally nothing there. And as you can imagine, there were some of the nicest photos we ever took, because we started noticing all those details. And this idea of, and I since just really see the value of how misleading it is. And it really links me to my first question, this idea of just doing things with better cameras, with kind of just replicating what's already out there. It's just really the exact opposite of what you really find inspiring or what you really find creative. And yet we very often forget it. So it's just really quite inspiring to hear you talk about so many different ways of how those limitations happen. So I just wonder if you have any other kind of answer in relation to how we can use creativity limitations in our teaching as well, because obviously that's a big part of it. And how do you make young people understand, or young filmmakers understand, that actually this is a very, very educational way of approaching what they're trying to do, rather than, oh, I want to have the biggest camera, the biggest budget, and everything the best. How do you think we can teach students that very often less is more?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think that currently I apply these ideas in, as I said, in the experimental film module, which is undergraduate module, and then on the master's MA in film production. And so, sort of dealing with your second question first about the cameras and stuff, I find it on the MA is more difficult. I think that a lot of students kind of join the MA partially because they like access to all the kit, and so I haven't succeeded in persuading them that it matters less. In a sense that I often feel like I feel sorry for them, because I often see how they're burdened by it. How they have this kind of sense that sense of this kind of, also the process of making, that it requires all these different procedures, and the camera is heavy and it's complicated, and how it actually complicates the process. On the other hand, I have to say that when I started my PhD, my first co-supervisor, with whom I didn't get along that well, I suppose, was kind of saying that it doesn't matter, that equipment doesn't matter at all. Like, it doesn't matter. And I kind of always felt very strongly that it depends what you want to achieve, right? That every tool can be used for something. And so, for example, I made my films in very simple ways, often using DSLR cameras, but actually I feel like I couldn't have achieved what I wanted to achieve with a mini DV camera, right? Because I was really interested in texture that I could achieve either through low depth of field, for which I needed proper lenses, sort of well-sized lenses and well-sized sensors, or through film stock, right? So like the Super 8 is a kind of lo-fi thing, but in many ways it's kind of expensive as well. It's not necessarily accessible technology. And so I think you can achieve, every tool allows you to achieve certain aesthetic. And I think that I think in the process of maybe selecting tools and in the kind of spirit of focusing on methods, it's good to align your intention, your creative intention with the tools you have. But it's definitely the case that certain tools don't afford you the things you need to achieve. Having said that, obviously we live in an exciting time, and we've lived for a while in a sense that the basic aesthetic qualities that you really need are very much affordable. I think that for a long time now, maybe at least 5-10 years, you can get a very cheap DSLR camera and you will have these cinematic qualities that you can, provided that you have the right aesthetic choices, you can make anything with it. So in that respect, often students craving the most expensive piece of kit, it seems crazy to me, because it's like, what's the point, right? I would always think like, I would take the smallest, most compact camera I can find that will give me the aesthetic results I can achieve. So that is the case. When it comes to the when it comes to the kind of creative limitations, generally application of creative limitations, I have to say that on the experimental film, it's generally well received. I think that kind of frames the whole module and works really well. On the MA, where students are making fairly conventional short fiction films in the first part of the module, the creative limitation that is given is that first they have to get certain of these kind of narrative abstract themes, which is clear that they, like, I mean, it clearly informs, it's so inspiring, right? That when you get given a theme, let's say swimming with sharks, or there is no mother, or well, I can't think of any other, but we have kind of a list of plenty of these that I offer to students, and it's clear how that just having that framing, that abstract theme, how that immediately channels the mind towards ideas for a story. And likewise, limitations such as having one location only, actually is very inspiring for mainstream fiction as well. So I think generally, I think the students could see the benefit of that each time.
Definitely. Well, I can see there's a question in the chat. So Kenneth is asking, unless you want to unmute yourself, Kenneth, and ask it. I'm happy to read it otherwise. So Kenneth says, Pavel, that was brilliant. Do you ever improvise the score as a reaction to the film?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that all the score is in a way made in response to the film. I have to say that in none of the work that I shared, I haven't made the music myself. I've always collaborated with composers. I find that the most satisfying aspect of collaboration. I think it's excellent. It's wonderful to collaborate with music composers. And each time it's the kind of the idea is to respond directly to the images. I'm very much encouraging the composers to try to respond intuitively to each image, again in that kind of rhizomatic fashion, that it's not about some kind of overarching structure or some kind of a sort of scaffolding or of sorts, but rather to respond to the individual images. But the music always becomes comes to being as a direct response to the visuals. So I think that's a good way to do that, really. So I think that is in terms of how they work exactly, whether they ever like improvise to the music. I'm not sure. I think that for the found footage film, 400 Feet in Forgotten Time, I forgot to mention, and I didn't actually play it with sound, but the music was composed by Isabel Benito Gutierrez, and she's very kind of classically oriented composer. So I would say the music there is the most complex, in the sense that it's a complex composition, but I believe that she has played a lot alongside the film to find the right music for it. Yeah.
Fascinating. Another thing that made me really think about the nature of creative practice research, as you were talking about your ideas, was how different each of the projects, how very different they are one from another. I remember I was really mind blown when I saw your nested cinema for the first time. I was just like, well, this is really making me rethink how I look at things, and seemingly a simple idea, but it just really shifts some toggles in your head, makes you look at things slightly differently. you know, but then as you were talking about all those different projects, it was really interesting how you said that the limitations very often, you were not really necessarily starting with the limitations. You kind of did it for the purpose of the presentation today, if I answered correctly, to kind of identify what was really the issue there. So I'm kind of interested to ask you, like, how, and probably you will have many different answers really, but how do you normally tend to come up with an idea? And the reason I'm asking about it, because it kind of makes me think about, a little bit about conceptual art. And I once wrote an article about creative practice research as a conceptual art, because we have some idea and it could be more or less you know, specific or not really. And then we just explore it through the making. And your work really makes me think about it in this way, and you're not just obviously repeating the same idea, but you're just looking at so many different you know, ways of what can be done and how, and I just find it really deeply refreshing, as I said. But yeah, I wonder if you have any way of how you start with a new project really, or maybe not, I don't know.
It's a good question, and I think certainly I think it's kind of resonates with that sense of conceptual art. But I think it is really two aspects that I think sort of similar to what I mentioned in the talk, that it's the idea of methods, that there's certain kind of a method that interests me, that just comes up as an idea, and I just find it exciting to try it. So I think a good example of that would be the extreme focal length. And again, it's some of these things as emerge. For example, the reason I made that film is because I went to when I was doing my PhD, I went to it was very hard to borrow kit, because somehow I wasn't I was like in this limbo as a PhD researcher to have access to all the equipment. But once I managed to sort of get like some extra equipment, and they had this very long lens, like this photography lens, like 1200 millimeter lens in there. And I thought, okay, I'll borrow it. And then I thought, okay, what can I do with this lens? You know, so I just find it very exciting that I have this super long lens. And then I thought, what can I do with it? And so that was the kind of that was the basis of the idea, really, was this kind of what can happen with this lens. So very much kind of methods based. But then I think the second thing is that co-creation with reality. That is that kind of, but what it is the constant kind of back and forth. So I think again, something that I think has strengthened through my PhD and my practice is that idea of kind of reflection in action, that you're kind of a reflective practitioner, and you're constantly responding, and you're kind of creatively responding. It's not a question of like, this is the thing I want to achieve, this is the end goal, and now I either can go right or wrong towards the goal, right? Rather than there is no goal. And then every step I will realize, okay, is there something interesting happening here? And if yes, I'm gonna absorb it, right? Or I will step from that. So everything is a stepping stone towards something. And I think that's in kind of direct response to the kind of just as things emerge in sort of as things happen, really, the kind of serendipity or the kind of flaws, right? So for example, again, coming back to that Affective Sign 5 film, I was kind of first disappointed. I've edited it. I had the rough cut, and I edited the sound, and it sounded terrible because it was just too much noise. And I thought, initially I thought maybe if the microphones were so close to the mouth, it would be fine, right? But then I thought it was very noisy. I'm not a sort of expert in sort of somehow removing the noise. And then I thought, hang on a minute, I can now just, what if I completely redub the whole thing, right? And then in the process, what emerged is that that allows now to completely remove sound and make it just the voice and music, make it very hypnotic and internal. And second, it creates this kind of a strange artificial feeling to the film. Again, this kind of a non-human alien kind of feeling that emerges from the kind of dubbing, which I deliberately did very close to the microphone, and kind of so it's unnaturally clean, the audio. And so none of this was, I never thought of it. I initially thought I will just edit this normally, right? And it wasn't possible. And so that again emerged from the necessity to keep pushing towards some kind of interesting outcome. So it's, I suppose, the final word, that it's about trying to get somewhere interesting rather than somewhere specific. That matters.
Absolutely, yeah. And I completely relate to this. Like this, when I supervise my PhD students who are almost all of them filmmakers, I always like to talk to them about this idea of, Sean's, reflection on action. Really, as you're saying, like, it's so interesting to see where certain experiments will take you. And it's absolutely fine not to know what it is. Otherwise, there will be no original contribution to knowledge. I keep saying to my students, because if you knew exactly what is that you're trying to achieve, that means it's already there, whereas you're trying to create something, which very often are methods. I know there's David who has his hand up. I just wanted to just very quickly comment from what Kenneth is saying, and I also jotted it down, which obviously links to Shauna we just mentioned, but this observation, based on what you said, like, this is really exciting observation. Doing always precedes thinking. That narrative originates in movement, not structure. So it's more an observation rather than a comment. I don't know if you want to add something to that, but I think we just talked about it really. So really, really interesting.
No, I'm pleased that it resonates, because that's something that, I think it's kind of exciting about language. Actually, came up with this only when I wrote this some kind of conclusion. I was thinking, what can I say in conclusion? Right. And then I kind of wrote this paragraph, and it came together, and it's it's quite exciting. Like, sometimes really nice. These things, like, you never quite realize it until you write it down. And so I've kind of discovered it all just thanks to this, really. So I'm kind of also pleased. It makes sense. Yeah.
It does, and obviously kind of related to my first question. But let's not let's not keep David waiting. So, David, do you want to unmute yourself and ask the question?
Yeah, sure. No, at first, I mean, it's obviously related to the stuff you've been talking about. But I've thought the projects, number one, were very, very interesting. But I wanted to just ask a quick question, and maybe there's no answer, but those are often the more interesting questions to ask. The notion of found footage, right? And this idea in terms of finding footage, finding Super 8 footage and working with it today, right? I mean, obviously a very rich history of work that you're obviously very aware of. How is that process changing now in terms of how when I think of found footage, I think you're rescuing something from a garbage can, right? But clearly that's no longer the case with you doing this project. You're bidding, right? Someone else has actually found this footage, and it's almost like you have to compete for it now. So I'm not saying it's not found footage, but I'm just interested in terms how your feelings in terms of how this technique is changing in relation to how you get these materials and how you mix them with digital technology.
Yeah, that's a fascinating question, really. I think that, and I haven't thought of this before. What you say about this is kind of that somebody found it first. I have to say, I never fully kind of I never had a kind of a unified theory of, like, who are these people that are selling this material. And I'm not sure, like, I don't know. Some of them, I could imagine that sometimes somebody clears their sort of attic, or they inherit something, or somebody passes away, and often people are just getting rid of stuff. So in a sense, I'm not sure if they truly discovered it and are aware of its value. The reason for it as well is because I was focusing on cheap material. So I wonder if people who selling this cheaply, if they are aware of the value. So I certainly would dare to say that I've kind of discovered the value of these things, because they have more value to me or to do the project than it had to the people who sold these things extremely cheaply. So I think that it's kind of similar to discovering it anywhere, but I think that the eBay mechanism is brilliant. I think in this way that it really could turbocharge the process and gives you kind of access to anywhere in the world, really, where the material might originate. And I obviously found, because it's not my kind of ultimate hobby to edit film stock, so I found that technique of, like, first filming the reference material and first, like, sort of working out the edit digitally before implementing the physical edit. I found that really helpful. I also found that doing the physical edit was great, because first of all, the film can be played as an actual film, and second of all, the scanning, when you scan the film, it kind of shows the edit. So it's got this additional materiality and additional flaw and imperfection, because the film's kind of jumping a little bit in the scanner as you have different multiple films being aligned, and each edit is like 4 frames basically taped over, and so the edit has its own plasticity, materiality. So that was very exciting, that kind of physical editing. But obviously, I haven't really done it since. So that's maybe, sorry, final thought, but since I'm in a kind of spirit of improv here, final thought on this, something occurred to me recently, again, how there is a resonance, perhaps, maybe it's a misguided idea, but there is a resonance between the idea of found footage and AI generation, in a way that this is kind of a 1 degree more removed from reality, right? So we have like the actual somebody filming stuff, then somebody finding that somebody filmed for some different context. And here we have this kind of 3rd degree of removal, where there's this kind of a model trained on material, and now it's kind of generating from that. So I see a certain kind of sort of a link to that kind of idea of AI generation, that in some sense it's like working with found footage. But again, this is a tenuous thought. Maybe it's completely nonsensical.
It sounds really interesting. I mean, I was just reading a paper today about how this notion of, if people know that something's been made with AI, it's changing people's responses to work, irrespective of how they're necessarily responding to the image natively, but just the idea of something being tagged with AI, or knowing that AI is in it, somehow changes the way that people are reacting to the imagery and reacting to that experience. So I think it speaks to a lot of how your process and how you're articulating that.
Yeah, I'm aware of the time. I'm aware we are out of time, but I'm just gonna ask like a hyper quick follow-up question from David. It's just literally like for 1 second for us to wrap up. So, and I was in my list. When you were buying those films for that project, did you have any indication whatsoever what was gonna be on the in a film, or not at all?
Well, it's long time ago, but I would say in the majority of cases I wouldn't. I think that in vast majority of cases, what was the information was the photograph of the film. So I think that this was actually quite specific with the commercially released work. So with the commercially released work, you often have a actual like a commercially printed sleeve, so you actually kind of know what it is. But again, you'll be surprised by things that kind of look how kind of amateurish often these commercial production were. These little weird kind of B-roll fiction films, and it's strange, having these. Or you would have like a fiction film that was recut for Super 8, so they could only be like a feature film, condensed to 21 minutes to fit on the reel. So very strange kind of things. And again, a wildly different year. I would say generally the films ranged from like 1960s to 1990s or early 2000s. So it was like a huge span of time, really. But with the home movies, I think there was no indication whatsoever, because you would just see the packaging, and it was just nothing kind of and it often came in batches that were like. People would sell it in bulk, so you would have kind of 5-10 reels as a kind of a home movies. Yeah, so it was very, very blind. Yeah, and it was exciting to sort of then see what's on it, that kind of process of receiving it, and absolute surprise. Yeah, and often it was something else as well. Often I would receive a commercial film, but it had something completely different inside, so that the packaging didn't match the film. So that happened a few times as well.
Brilliant. Well, I wish we had another half an hour to talk about it, but I am immensely grateful for your time, Pavel. It was just genuinely so refreshing to hear you talk, and I can't wait to, hear and see more of your upcoming projects. So all the best. Thank you so much. I'm gonna make sure that this is available online, by tomorrow, the latest. And just really, really thank you. And thank you everyone who joined us today. Have a lovely evening.
Thanks, Laura. I appreciate it.